Okay. Okay, thank you guys so much for coming today. I'm very excited you guys are here on a Sunday. And I'm very excited to start this class. So my name is Claire Yang, and I'm really excited to welcome you to our first poetry session with Word Up Writers. And today we're going to demystify poetry a little bit. We're going to read some examples, and we're also going to start writing our own poetry. So let's quickly go into our table of contents. So today, first things first, we'll do some quick introductions, and then we're going to kind of dive into an intro to poetry. We're going to do a close reading of Ocean Vuong, which I'm really excited for you guys to read, and then we're going to close off with a free write.
hmm
Okay, so again, like I said before, my name is Claire Yang. I'm currently a high school junior at the Academy for Information Technology in New Jersey. As for my specific poetry credentials, I am a two times National Scholastic Arts and Writing gold medalist in poetry and a National Young Arts winner also in poetry. So I really like poetry. And then now let's do you guys. So if you guys could tell me your name, maybe what state you're from, and your favorite author or book, that would be great. So does anyone want to start first?
Mm, I'll go first.
Okay, thank you, Allie.
So, my name is Ali Wu. I'm from Westfield, New Jersey, and my favorite series is Wings of Fire by Tweety Sutherland.
Mm, that's a good choice. Okay. Emily, do you want to go next?
Hi, my name is Emily Yu. I'm from New Jersey, and my favorite book is Circe by Madeline Miller.
Oh, I've heard of that one too. Okay. Um, you can go.
My name's Yang Yang. I'm from New Jersey, Warren. My favorite book is The One and Only Ivan.
Oh, I have that book too. Perfect. Nolan, do you want to go?
My name's Nolan. I'm from New Jersey. My favorite book is One Wrong Step by Jennifer A. Nielsen.
Nice. Okay, and then I, Missy, do you want to go?
Yeah, it's Emma C. My name's Emma C. I'm from Maryland, and my favorite book is probably uh the Percy Jackson series.
Jackson series. I love that too. Okay.
Mm.
Perfect. So now let's go into a bit more of the course introduction. So for this entire course, it'll be about 10 weeks or so, and we'll be learning about the fundamentals of poetry and prose, as well as creating a writing portfolio that you can submit to publications, literary magazines, some summer programs. And we'll try to have it ready by Scholastic, so you'll have it ready by the summer. And we really encourage you to really put in all your work because that's how you can get the most out of this program. And our Word Up team is really here to kind of support you and guide you along the way. So if you guys ever have any questions, feel free to ask me or any other member of the team. And this is fundamentals of contemporary poetry and prose. So it's not necessarily like Shakespeare, or like more classical poetry. We're more learning about like what people write on a day-to-day, like what people write now, and what the most popular forms of writing are being developed right now. So just like a forewarning, we'll probably not be looking at too many Shakespeare texts or anything like that, and we'll be submitting to competitions and publications. So I know some of you guys are might be looking at Scholastic, which is in December, and it's always good to start really early. And also, like I said, developing creative writing portfolio. So I guess that's kind of part of being like a high level writing class. So instead of writing just a bunch of like disparate pieces, or separate pieces, it's really important to learn kind of how we can tie those pieces together and make them kind of unifying, and give them a unifying theme. So that's why we'll be doing a portfolio. And then the last thing is obviously just have fun. Honestly, if you don't take away anything from this class, I just hope you guys had fun. And I think writing should always be about having fun and something that's enjoyable and that you look forward to. So here is our selected readings. This class is going to be based on excerpts from various pieces. So we'll be reading pieces from different magazines and different competitions, of course, like Scholastic. For poetry specifically, we'll be reading Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong, and then Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman, who is an American Youth Poet Laureate. And then for prose, it's Lord of the Flies, and you guys won't have to buy any of these books, by the way. I will provide you guys with a PDF copy, so there's no need to buy anything, especially since there's a lot of different materials. And then let's quickly talk a little bit about grading. So, This class is a bit special in the way that your final portfolio or your final project is going to be 4 to 5 pieces long, and that's going to be the majority of your grade. So this is mostly because this is like a competition class. So we're trying to make it that you can actually use what you're writing in competitions rather than having to write something new for your competitions. So for your writing portfolio, hopefully you'll have 4 to 5 pieces by the end of this course, and it'll be your final project along with a 200-word artist statement to submit for publications. And then we also have the participation grade, which includes paying attention in class, talking in the chat, turning on your camera. And again, like I said before, you get more out of it if you put into it and really interact with the activities that we have planned. So it's more helping you. And then for homework, just like try to turn it in every week. I know sometimes it can be really hard if you're trying something new, but at least try to put in some effort, and that way we can grade it, we can give feedback, and that way you guys can improve and also be more comfortable with just getting your work out there. Okay, so here's the syllabus of the class. Like I said before, we're going to talk about fundamentals of poetry and prose, learning how to write with intentions, artist statement, theme, motifs, figurative language, and just building on a lot of those technical skills before we kind of practice writing. And I'm kind of breezing through this, but for our class structure, we have about 20 to 30 minutes for the actual lesson of the day. So we'll look at some reading samples for 10 to 20 minutes, and then for 15 minutes, we're going to be doing a free write of sharing with class and also really working on what we learned. And then the workshopping will kind of come later as we go, but it's very helpful to actually kind of share your work, right? Get feedback, put your work out there, and be very comfortable with, again, putting your work out there. And then free writing is also a really good way to just get your ideas out. So we'll have a document where you'll do your free writing. And obviously, I won't actually go in and read it. If you want it to be more private, that's fine, of course. But I just want to have a space to make sure that you're writing your free writes because it's a good time to get your ideas down. So I'll see if I can actually send the free write thing in the chat, and you guys can kind of create something. Let me see if I can send it in the chat real quick. Does anyone have any questions, by the way? I know I kind of talked really fast.
No.
No? Okay. Um, okay, I just put the drive in the chat. If you guys could let me know if you can access it, and then that way you can create your files and docs in there and do your free writes there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, got it. Okay, thank you, Nolan. I'll give you guys like maybe a few seconds to do that. And if you could let me know like in the chat if you're able to do it, that would be fantastic. Okay, thank you. Actually, I'll create like a big Google Doc so you guys can all write on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I just put the free write Google Doc in the chat as well. Okay. Okay. Let me just move on. And if you guys ever have any trouble accessing anything, just feel free to pause me in the middle. Um, But yeah, like I was saying, free writes, it's very helpful to have everything in a document so that at the end of the course, you'll get to be like, oh, I have this document full of free writes. What can I turn this into? And then when I did Scholastic, a lot of the pieces that were successful for me were things that I'd done before at other workshops. And so you can basically do all these free writes and have them into a document that you can turn into pieces later. So I feel like free writing will be really helpful just for how you kind of want to generate ideas and also think in a specific reference frame related to the lesson of the day. Okay. And then, so first participation question. I want to ask you guys, why do you think people write poetry? Like, I know a lot of people kind of look to poetry as something like, oh, this is a very esoteric art. It's like Shakespeare. And I thought that a long way. I thought that for a long time as well. But if we were to think for a while, what are some specific reasons that people might write poetry? And you guys can just type your answers in chat, and I'll give it a couple of minutes. Or Ali, yeah. Why do you think?
To maybe just express themselves.
Self-expression is definitely a big thing. Um, Does anyone else have any other ideas, or you can type in the chat? Be able to write. hmm Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Express creativity, talk about trauma in a less open way. Yeah, definitely. All good points. Easy to relate to. Show their thoughts in a creative way. Okay. Okay, yeah, definitely. A lot of things like showing your work in a creative way, like self-expression, really talking about things in a less open way. Those are definitely part of poetry as well. And there's one thing, there's like a really great essay called Poetry is Not a Luxury by Audre Lorde, I think. And she's a very famous poet. She's kind of like the Toni Morrison of poetry, if you will. And her idea is essentially that poetry isn't really made to impress or like flex your technical skills, but it's really to kind of express or illuminate aspects of your life, and to kind of distill those ideas. So it's kind of like a creative lyrical expression, and it really lets you say things in a way that other forms like prose, other forms like fiction or other mediums won't. So in poetry, you can kind of be a little more vague. You can kind of think a little bit more creatively, and you can touch the reader in a very specific way. So my understanding of poetry is that it's kind of like a creative lyrical form of self-expression, and it lets you say things in a way that other forms of writing might not necessarily let you. So definitely all great points. And yeah, for enjoyment too. So without further ado, let's get started into poetry overview, what makes a good poem, some more components of poetry, the writing process, and then finally an introduction to Ocean Vuong, and his book. So first, what makes a good poem? I think what makes a good poem are there are three aspects of a good poem. And some of these kind of merge together. So I'd say cohesiveness and use of voice and themes can really be the same thing sometimes. But overall, the first thing is cohesiveness. So does this actually make sense, right? Does it feel like one unified piece? And then the second is technical skill. So this is the thing that kind of has more of a learning curve because both cohesiveness and technical skill are a learning curve. It's like how can you balance the two? And then finally, your usage of voice and theme. So that's kind of the stylistic approach that you choose to write from, your perspective, the tone, the recurring ideas that you keep coming back to. And maybe this is just my take of the three most important things. Obviously, this class is talking about a specific form of poetry, specifically contemporary poetry. So, in my opinion, for what we're doing here in this class, I think those are the three things that matter the most. Okay, so let's start with this excerpt. On the right, if you can see, there's a little poem. And I want to ask, does anyone want to read this poem on the side? Nolan, is that a hand?
No, I guess I'll still read it.
Okay.
To the experimental Betsit miserablism of your gaze begins its sprung crash through mayor upon Mayan mayor of the internal.
Okay. Do you guys like that poem? Like, what do you guys think? Do you thumbs up, thumbs down?
Hmm, it's pretty vague.
Okay, I see. Vague, yeah, middle
Hmm,
thumbs down.
It's not really saying anything.
It's not really saying anything.
hmm,
Yeah.
middle.
Middle? Okay. Yeah, so I guess you guys are thinking like, why am I showing you this bad poem, right? And let's see what the poet himself has to say about this. So this was a poem by Luke Kennard, who's actually a really good British poet, and he said this poem is completely meaningless, hand-gnawingly, howling, embarrassing. So I've been kind of bamboozling you guys. Um, this is basically someone's poetry from when they were very young. So essentially, what I'm trying to show is that even the best poets have kind of like a learning curve or like a learning phase where they kind of suck. And then number two is that just because you have like a lot of language or you have a lot of technical skill doesn't mean that it's a good poem, right? Like the poem says, it doesn't really mean anything. And what he's saying is that it's basically a lot of fancy words and they're just kind of like pushed together. And maybe the rhythm's good, maybe the sounds are kind of good, but again, like taken together, it doesn't mean anything. And that's what kind of like that's what just destroys any meaning that you can kind of derive from it. So it's really important to consider how your poem comes together. You can have very simple lines and it could still be a very extremely effective poem. So then I think then another thing is like it's kind of cliche. So it's just what's really important, and I think what will help is just knowing poetry overall and just thinking about reading poetry and making sure that what you're writing actually has something behind it, actually makes sense. So like reading contemporary poetry, learning from authors that you've seen, stuff like that, and we'll do a lot of that in class as well. But cohesiveness is probably like the first thing that you really want to think about because if your poem doesn't make sense, ultimately, there's really no point in trying to make it like technically awesome and everything else if there's nothing behind what you're saying. So you guys didn't fall for my trick. It is a very not too great poem. Okay, and then now let's move on to technical skills. So first, for technical skills, there's form. There's all different types of forms. There's blank verse, free verse, specialized structures like sonnets or villanelles, and other forms like ekphrastic. I think that's how you say it. Poems, abecedarians. I've never actually tried to say these words out loud, but there are a lot of different types of poems. And then some of these poems can also show up directly in the poem title. And when you write your own poems, you can either kind of invent your own form of poetry or kind of borrow an existing one that has been developed over time for a specific purpose because it sounds pleasing or again, like I said, serves a specific purpose. So it's kind of worth asking yourself, do I want to do my own thing or would I rather want to kind of follow an existing structure or known structure that would help my poem flow in the way that I want? And then the next point is word choice. So this matters in all writing, but I think it matters especially in poetry because poems are often shorter and so each word carries more weight. And poetry often feels very musical, almost musical, and specific sounds of your words like vowels versus consonants, short versus long words like juxtaposition, all of that can kind of change the flow and mood of your poem. So it's really important to be intentional with your diction and make sure that the poem kind of sounds better and feels better that way. And in the poem we just looked at on the previous slide, there were a lot of like cool words, right? But when you put them all together, the meaning kind of collapses. So you don't want to just grab fancy SAT vocab words just because it sounds fancy. You actually want to choose concrete, specific words that actually serve to kind of forward the meaning of the poem. And then there's wordplay. So wordplay is repetition, rhyme, puns. You can swap nouns with verbs and so on. And these techniques can create alliteration, double meanings, and really interesting textures almost in the sound of the poem. And they can also just make the poem more fun to read out loud. So if you take the phrase teethed his knuckles into a yearning, that's very unexpected, right? It has a strong sound and it feels more poetic than just a flat, like literal description. And swapping nouns with verbs like scissoring instead of scissor, you can do things like that too. And there isn't really a rigid rule for when you can do it or what you can do, but it can often give like a more vivid, concrete imagery and a more dynamic feeling to your poetry. And then a few things to keep in mind. Repetition with contradiction or ambiguity. So if you repeat a line or phrase and then introduce kind of like a slight change the second time, then that difference kind of becomes more powerful. So it's almost like repetition sets up a pattern that your reader is expecting, and then contradiction breaks that pattern, and that really draws the attention of the reader. And then for symbolism and metaphor, figurative language really lets you layer in the meaning. So you can have one image can stand in for like a larger idea or emotion, and this is kind of where double meanings and deeper interpretations often come from. And then punctuation and grammar. One of the fun parts of poetry is that you don't have to treat grammar as strictly as you would in an essay, right? You can bend or kind of like break the rules. You can play with the punctuation. You can use line breaks to control the pace and emphasis. And but the key with that is that you should make sure that these choices are intentional. Like you're not just randomly forgetting to capitalize your I. They should have or serve some sort of purpose. And then finally, beyond all these technical tools, you also want to think about how the poem kind of looks and moves on the page. So form isn't just about sonnets versus free verse. It's really about how the lines and stanzas and also the white space as well kind of guide the reader's eye and shape their experience when they're reading the poem. And we'll look at a poem later that's a really great example of how kind of layout and structure on a page can deepen the meaning. And then now we're at voice and theme. So I'm curious, what are some themes that you guys tend to use in your writing if you know of any? And you can type them in the chat. And if not in your own writing, what are some themes that you guys usually look for when you're reading a book? Or what are themes that you guys really enjoy finding? So I'll give you a couple seconds to type that into the chat. Identity, love. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. Um, Importance of sacrifice, acceptance. Yeah, I think acceptance is really, really big in poetry as well. Um, yep. Funny. Yeah. Funny is definitely important. Non-repetitive stuff, compassion. Yep, perfect. Those are all really, really relatable themes, I think. Okay, so perfect. Talking a little bit more about voice. So voice is essentially kind of how you express your ideas. So th those are also the ideas specifically that you chose to focus on. And it's kind of like your own stylistic approach when writing poetry. So you'll notice that some poets write in a very light or delicate way. Some are more funny and playful. And some kind of blend are a blend of those styles. So when you're writing poetry, it's really about asking yourself, what kind of style do I want to explore? And then, for example, for me, my own style tends to be more like reflective rather than humorous or like limerick style poetry. And again, that's just personal preference. It's completely up to you what direction you want to take in your own writing. And as a side note, we won't focus so much on humorous poetry in this class, but if that's something that anyone is really interested in, just let me know and I can try to make that into a lesson. And the second point is authenticity. So, authenticity really connects strongly or closely to voice and cohesiveness, right? A strong, authentic voice will carry your poem much further. And by authentic, I mean something that really feels real. So, you can kind of strengthen authenticity by using really specific and intentional language, clear, cohesive ideas, thoughtful word choice, and really being deliberate about what you want your reader to understand. So you can ask yourself, how am I saying this? And then what do I want my reader to feel or realize? And then another important concept is author identity. So as an author, you have an identity. There are certain ideas or experiences and forms that you'll naturally return to in your work. So those recurring elements are part of who you are as a writer. And then as an example, we'll be reading some Ocean Vuong later on. So Ocean Vuong typically explores grief and healing. He explores language and kind of decolonizing language. And then he also explores queer Asian identity. So in his book, Time is a Mother, he reflects really deeply on grief, especially in relation to family. And these themes are really kind of central to his identity as a writer. And then author identity can also include form. So not just what you're writing, but kind of how you're writing it. So for instance, someone could focus more on writing prose poems, which is basically poems that look like short paragraphs, but are still poetry, right? Poetry can be anything. Or another person could lean more into kind of traditional forms of poetry. And all of that, again, is part of your writer identity. And then for choosing themes, so when you're actually choosing a theme, it's really helpful to focus on some things that are meaningful to you. So some common themes that students mentioned are compassion, importance of sacrifice, identity, love. So those are all things that maybe you guys find important to yourself, and that's all really important when you're kind of building your author identity. And then some really popular ones in competitions like Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, they typically gravitate towards certain themes like family, culture, and connection. So that's why kind of understanding voice and theme is really important, especially when you're writing for kind of those specific audiences. And then some other ideas or common contemporary themes include memory, so past, present, future, identity, which could include your race, gender, culture, language and belonging, grief and healing, and then family and friendship. So those are all some examples of themes that we'll be developing further in this class. And then for symbolism and metaphor, so symbolism and metaphor are really kind of the vehicles that you guys use to carry your theme. So you can think of them kind of like the car that drives your ideas forward, for a lack of a good metaphor. And then to kind of strengthen your themes, you can choose really concrete objects. And we'll talk about this a little more later on. Also repeat imagery, but repeat it intentionally. Use consistent word choice and really reinforce your ideas through description and pattern. So when you have ideas that kind of extend throughout a piece, like through repeated imagery or symbols or motifs, they can really create a sense of cohesion and depth. Okay, and then the writing process. So the writing process can sound a little abstract, but I like to think of it as kind of like a vibe check, right? So with creative writing, especially poetry, there isn't always a strict structure the way that there is with essays. So when you write an essay, you're told, put your thesis in your introduction, right? Have three body paragraphs, use a clear topic sentence, follow a rubric, and make sure you hit this point, this point, this point. Poetry is kind of completely different. It doesn't work like that. And it's less about rigid structure and more about the overall feeling of the piece, so like the vibe check, right? And that's why some poetry can feel like hit or miss. And there's a learning curve, right? Something that passes the vibe check for you in one stage of your life might not pass it for you in this stage of your life. A poem that you loved completely when you were younger might feel kind of off years later when you look at it again. So because poetry is more subjective, one reader could connect really deeply with the piece, and then another might not really think anything of it. So ideally, you want your poem to resonate with most readers, even though kind of total agreement is impossible. And then what do I mean by vibe? So when we say vibe check, we mean like, what do I want this poem to feel like? What emotional or intentional or intellectual effect am I aiming for? And then what do I want the readers to walk away with? So in the early drafts, you can just focus on overall feeling instead of immediately obsessing over the technical details like motifs, diction, or any specific poetic devices, right? If you jump straight into kind of polishing the technical elements, you might end up with a very technically impressive poem that feels emotionally empty. So it's important to kind of have an overall sense of what you want your reader to get out of your poem. And then a really great way to kind of develop your style or develop your sense of vibe is by reading other poets. So when you read other poets, you should really pay attention to not just the technique, but also how their poem makes you feel. So ask yourself, why does this work? And really notice patterns in the poet's style. So most poets really maintain consistent stylistic tendencies across their work. So if you love the way a particular poem is written, you can read more by that poet. And you can try to kind of imitate their style as practice. This is kind of called copywriting, and really break down how they construct imagery, how they construct their pacing, tone, um, and technical details absolutely matter as well, but they kind of serve the vibe, right? So technical details help create that emotional effect. And then for drafting. So for drafting, you should really start with a rough draft, focused on the central theme, the main idea, the emotional kind of direction you want to go in, and then the overall cohesiveness. So again, like I said before, don't focus on the nitty-gritty. Don't worry about the perfect word choice at first. Really just get the general idea down and really shape kind of the feeling you want before polishing the language. And then also don't stress if your rough draft feels bad. That's very normal. Every writer's first draft is messy or doesn't sound good, or is unpolished. Just getting something down on paper is really important. And then revising is where you can actually kind of take that really bad first draft and make it something really good. And that's where a lot of the growth really happens. So some helpful strategies for revising is to read your poem out loud. And then you can also step away from it and return later, like kind of let it marinate. And then you can also workshop it with others. So that's a great way to kind of get feedback from other people, see if what you're trying to do is being accomplished with your readers. And then you can also share it with someone outside of the class. And then sometimes you'll feel that your poem is doing exactly what you want, right? And then someone else kind of reads it and is confused. So that kind of feedback with different people is very valuable because poetry is subjective, but you really want to make sure that you're still clear, right? Clarity still matters. So, I think you guys should first revise for cohesiveness. So, does this actually matter? Am I was and what I re Sorry, grammar is not working. Does it actually make sense, right? Does the poem work together? And then after you revise for cohesiveness, you should then revise for skill, right? So like then those are those nitty-gritty aspects like word choice, phrasing, rhythm, imagery. And there's really no point in making something technically brilliant if it doesn't communicate anything clearly. And that's something that I've kind of repeated throughout, which is it's really important to actually have a meaning behind your poetry. And then for competitions and publishing, uh, quick question, how many of you guys are signed up because you want to like kind of submit your writing to publications or literary magazines elsewhere? You guys can do like a thumbs up or if that's something you're interested in. No one's interested in. Okay, perfect. Let me see.
I'm not too I'm not too interested, but I can do it.
Okay. Yeah, Allie. Okay. Yeah. So for competition writing, that's like a big part, and maybe it'll get a little more important as you go into high school. But just it's completely okay to care about that. Obviously, wanting to succeed is not a bad thing. But I just want you guys to remember that if your poem doesn't win, that doesn't mean it's bad, right? Judging and competitions are really subjective, and some judges have preferences and theme styles, or even like the specific reader that's reading your poem can really influence your results. So, for example, the Scholastic Arts and Writing competition is a very major national competition, but the judging for that competition can vary significantly by region. So, in some cases, it's a very small number of people that determine outcomes. So, kind of their own personal taste plays a very big role in deciding kind of who moves on to the next level. So, I would say rejection often says more about the fit rather than the quality of your poem. So don't feel like you're a horrible writer just because you got rejected. And then adding on to that, the earlier you kind of start submitting and the more experience you gain, that really helps you kind of improve yourself in general. And then growth, like over time, matters more than just like a single award, right? Being able to kind of focus on improvement rather than just immediate success and immediate winning really helps you build that success in the long run. And then the final step of the writing process, after you're done drafting, refining, revising, is eventually just sending it out into the world, right? Sharing it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Creative writing is, like I said, and I keep repeating, it's inherently subjective. So at some point, you revise, you submit, and then you just move on, right? And it's really important to just like write, revise, share, and repeat. And then the real cycle to becoming a really good writer is just writing a lot, and that kind of is the real writing process. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about Ocean Vuong. Has anyone heard of Ocean Vuong so far? You can do like a thumbs up if you have. Ali hasn't. Okay. Okay, Amisi. Yeah, definitely. Has anyone else heard of Ocean Vuong? Okay. Yeah. So the funny thing is, I feel like in contemporary poetry circles, Ocean Vuong is very famous. But then kind of the second you step out of contemporary poetry, a lot of people don't know who he is. And there's people that like there's a professor at Harvard University and he doesn't know who Ocean Vuong is, and he's like a poetry professor. And I think that's kind of wild. But within kind of student poetry spaces and modern literary circles, he's a very big name. So we're going to kind of talk about how you study specifically an author. So, what we're going to do right now is an author breakdown. And this is what you can do whenever you find a writer that you really like. And you can ask kind of who are they, what do they write about, and then what influences them, and what themes in their writing show up again and again. So, we can do that really quickly for Ocean Vuong. Who is Ocean Vuong? He's primarily a poet, although he's written a lot of fiction as well. And his work often explores the immigrant Asian experience, the queer experience, and the diasporic experience. So, does anyone want to define the term diaspora or diasporic? Diaspora, I think. Um, does anyone have an idea of what that is? Okay. No problem. So, it's kind of tricky. Diaspora refers to a group of people who have dispersed from their original homeland. So, for example, if your family is originally from China but now lives in the US, then you're part of the Chinese diaspora. So it's kind of the cultural identity across displacement. And then for Ocean Vuong's background, he was born in Vietnam and then he came to the United States as a child refugee after the Vietnam War. He grew up in Connecticut and he grew up in a first generation immigrant family. And then he first gained major recognition with his poetry collection, Night Sky with Exit Wounds, which is what we're going to look at today. And that one won a lot of awards and it really kind of launched his career. And then he also wrote the novel On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which I'm sure you've seen if you've kind of been to a bookstore. And that's pretty excellent as well, but it's kind of a bit long for this course. And then for his specific style and voice, so um, Wong's style is more ethereal and intimate rather than humorous. His tone is very honest, it's sincere, and it's kind of emotionally direct, right? He's especially strong at capturing very specific moments in time using concrete imagery. And he also confronts American norms, he confronts gender expectations, and also traditional ideas about identity. So rather than celebrating success stories, he often really focuses on kind of fragility, failure, grief, and kind of what could have been. And he's very interested in how violence, whether it be historical or personal, kind of shapes people's identity. So, a quote from one of his interviews is that it's rather that we can perhaps look through our violent origins and say, why did we do that? What does it mean? And what do we do about it in the future? So, the reckoning within violence has fashioned our identities as a means of self-knowledge. So his poetry is kind of intense, maybe a little mushy if it doesn't, and maybe it doesn't pass your own personal vibe check. And of course, that's okay. Poetry is subjective. So, but the reason that we're going to be studying him isn't that we'll be reading his work. It's also to model down how to break down an author, right? How to identify their themes, how to notice kind of their stylistic tendencies, and then how to also understand their broader concerns. And I think that's a very powerful skill if you want to kind of read widely and improve your own poetry as well. So the lecture is almost over, I promise. We're going to be soon reading into the actual writing and reading in a second. But first, I kind of want to explain why we're looking at this collection specifically. So one big reason why Night Sky with Exit Wounds is that the author experiments with a lot of different forms. So you've probably heard of the haiku, which is the 5-7-5 syllable structure. There's also something called a haibun, which is basically like a short prose piece followed by a haiku at the end. So it kind of blends storytelling with poetry in a really tight way. And we'll also see some prose poems, which basically, again, like I said before, looks like paragraphs, but they have poetic elements like sound, imagery, rhythm. And then one of the poems you'll read even weaves in kind of song lyrics alongside traditional poetry. So formally, this book is very diverse in kind of what it offers. And then beyond form, the content is very important and powerful as well. It talks about vivid images and explores ideas of intergenerational trauma. It also balances violent imagery with kind of moments that feel timeless and comforting. So this contrast is really important as well. It kind of keeps the work emotionally layered rather than feeling like one note. And then another feature is the focus on the human body. So the body becomes a site of memory, grief, and identity. And then this is something that's actually very popular or common in contemporary poetry, and it often also shows up in major competitions and publications. Okay, now we're gonna do a close reading of one poem, which is called "Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong," by Ocean Vuong. And I want you guys to take a moment and just read through it carefully and kind of follow along. And don't worry about analyzing every detail yet. It's a pretty dense poem. It's very kind of emotionally heavy and it has a lot of figurative language as well. So then after you read it, I'll give you a few minutes to read it. I want you to think about your first reactions. Were you confused? Were you moved? Were you curious? And again, there is no wrong response. Just start with what you notice. And then, yeah, when we're discussing, even something simple like I notice a lot of figurative language is a very strong starting point. So I'll give you guys a few moments to read that. Can everyone see it, by the way? I know it's kind of like small on the screen. I can send.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, has everyone gotten a chance to finish reading the poem? Okay. I noticed a lot in the chat, and I think they're really good points. Nolan said that the poem is kind of talking about Ocean Vuong, kind of talking to himself and maybe comforting himself by trying to forget his past. Yeah, this is kind of like a letter to himself. And then his use of figurative language is kind of vague, which makes it more interesting. Also, the line breaks make breaths and rhythm, which helps create an effect, I guess. Okay. Yeah, definitely. And then one little thing I want to point out is with enjambment. It's just like a really little thing. But you can see it's like he's kind of saying your father is only your father, and then there's like a line break there, and then it says until one of you forgets, right? So it the like the effect of breaking it at the your father is only a father your father is kind of saying like oh like um kind of like the poem said your father is only your father, and then that kind of specific enjambment, the line break right there, kind of creates a different effect. So that's like really subtle. And then we'll learn how to do things like that, like enjambment later on as well. I'm not sure what it meant. Yeah, this is a really dense poem as well. So I think just being able to read this and kind of get a sense of poetry, since you said he lived through Vietnam War, I think Ocean Vuong is thinking back to that time when he says jump. I promise it's not a lifeboat. And also speaking. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good insight. I think the Vietnam War um, kind of plays a big impact in a lot of the work that he writes now. Um, yeah, so all really insightful comments. So yeah, I quickly talked about enjambment a little. Some other things like lines like how the spine won't remember its wings, that really creates very striking imagery, right? And then it's also not, it's very surreal and it's not like random. And the poet really balances imaginative metaphor with kind of being clear emotionally. And that balance is kind of part of the technical skill. The images are pretty unusual, but they still kind of communicate something meaningful. So, yeah, this poem has a lot of unconventional approaches to trauma, to memory, to identity. And I think it's a very interesting poem to kind of get into more of an introduction to Ocean Vuong. Um, yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed reading that poem, and we'll have a bunch more poems by different authors as well. If Ocean Vuong isn't your jam, like I know Alvin said, he's not really sure what it meant. So definitely, we'll be reading a very diverse collection of poetry. So you guys can hopefully find some poet that you really enjoy reading. Okay. Now we're going to try to do a free write. So we're going to try to do something ourselves. And kind of the topic of this free write is to write your own Someday I'll Love Something poem. You can address yourself, you can address your culture, you can address some abstract concept, a habit, a place, really anything. And the key is to think about kind of growth and healing and also transformation. So what does it mean to love that thing someday? Like, why not now? What needs to change? And try to use imagery and metaphor in the way Vuong does. So don't just explain. And I know this is kind of cliche, like show, don't tell, really show. And then I'll give you about maybe 5 to 7 minutes or until like, yeah, about 7 minutes. And then we'll share a favorite line at the end if you guys are comfortable with that. Does anyone have any questions about this free write?
No.
Okay. If you ever have any questions, just let me know. You can write in the free write Google Doc and I think that's in the chat. If anyone can't access it, just let me know. Okay. And I can go back to the oops, I'm annotating. Okay. Um, okay. I went back to the poem so you guys can kind of reference Ocean Vuong's. Let me erase that. Okay. Oh wait, sorry guys. The free write was about like let me go back to the slide. This slide is just oh my this slide is just that's the homework. This is the free write instructions. I noticed some of you guys were writing an analysis of Ocean's poem, but that's good too. Um but yeah, the free write was to kind of write a poem yourself, addressing like write your own someday I'll love poem, and you can address yourself, your culture, some abstract concept or habit, a place. You can just address anything, and then kind of what does it mean to love that thing someday? Why not now? What needs to change? So that's kind of the free write idea. But you guys can continue analyzing Ocean's poem as well, if that's kind of a better starting point or jumping off point to writing your own poem. Yeah, I should have been a little more clear with sorry that I showed the other one. Okay, it is 5 o'clock, so I don't want you guys to kind of run over time. But I hope that was a fun exercise for you guys. On obviously, you guys can keep writing this poem as well if you think it's something you're interested in. Um, but now let's quickly talk about homework. So, um, also, I want to share one opportunity. So, WordUp has a mentorship program, which I'll put the link to in our Google Classroom, or I can email your parents after. And this is basically a one-on-one meeting with one of our team, and you can go over any specific goals or writing pieces that you want. So that's a really good opportunity if you want more one-on-one feedback. And then second, there's a Kenyon Review Young Writers Workshop, which is connected to the Kenyon Review. I think some of you guys might be a little young for this, but this could be something you're looking out for if you're in high school. And then this is a really respected summer writing program where students live on campus and workshop their creative writing with their peers. So if you're really serious about creative writing, it's a really excellent opportunity. And the application closes March 1st. And then at the end of each class, I'll try to share like any programs or competitions or literary magazines um, that are open. Yes, the homework will be posted on Google Classroom. And I'll quickly introduce it right now. So for homework, you can read the following 5 poems from Night Sky with Exit Wounds, and I'll give you kind of the PDF links. And then you can write a short reflection about 100 to 200 words, focusing specifically on how the author expresses theme and how you could maybe apply those techniques to your own writing. And then you can also try to write your own poem. And you can choose one of the forms from the assigned poems and model your structure kind of after it. In terms of theme, you can really write about anything, any other theme that you kind of identify with. And then I'll also be posting a pre-questionnaire so I can kind of better understand what you want from this course and also some feedback for the first class. If you have anything that you think I could have improved on, definitely let me know so I can make this class better next time. And I'll put everything that you have to do in the Google Classroom. So hopefully you guys had a lot of fun. And thank you guys so much for coming to this first class. And if you have any questions, don't feel free to reach out. Um, so is everyone good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Bye bye. Bye.